Hello. Welcome to the Advanced Technical SEO for the Modern Marketeer. Here, Sebastian Jubek speaking. I'm heading up the Technical SEO team for Search Laboratory. Shall we just start and discuss a broad range of various techniques that we came across over through our experience and testing, etc. But before we do that, just a quick intro to who Search Laboratory is. Basically, we're an integrated global marketing agency of around 150 people, split between offices in the UK and US. In practical terms, that means that we support clients in all stages of online user journey, including SEO, paid, programmatic advertising, social media, and digital strategy, and we're able to do that globally by having in-house multilingual and native linguists. So a bit of housekeeping for you. The webinar should last about 30 minutes. If you have any questions as we go along, please send them to us via chat. And we'll spend a few minutes at the end of the webinar to answer those. So without further ado, why I'm speaking about those things. Essentially, as mentioned, I'm heading up the technical SEO team. There's about 6-7 of us. We are constantly exploring Google algorithm from the technical aspects, and we've built up quite a big expertise in that field. Especially with kind of cutting edge technologies like SEO A/B testing and JavaScript and other issues across international markets as well. So how using a scientific approach to data will lead to more successful SEO campaigns? Essentially, in terms of SEO objectives, we're really here to drive insights at a very large scale and in a timely manner. So obviously in terms of crises, but also in terms of Google algorithms that are very frequent at this day and age. We need to react to deliver as much growth and grasp those opportunities for the clients, and that's really the main objective of the looking out for new tactics and new ways of doing things. Obviously, at this stage, we have a lot of best practice in the industry, and we also have a data-driven approach. And frankly, one of the key issues around technical SEO is that sometimes we do believe something is right for the website, but without testing really and having a solid evidence of that, it's really not worth, and it doesn't create a business case to actually implement that. So that's why we prefer a data-driven and testing approach to things. So we have key challenges here, as mentioned. It's conventional wisdom where we are recommending certain things like change of page titles. At the large scale, that might create a massive cost and big effort to research, to also implement those things. So basically, with testing is definitely a way to go. So in terms of key takeaways that you're going to get today is you're going to learn why Google loves JavaScript and how to fix common mistakes that could be holding you back. Key considerations for perfect international SEO. You're also going to learn why SEO A/B testing is the future of technical SEO, and automation as a key factor in any robust technical strategy. So just jumping into JavaScript, and I need to say up front that it is a bit of a sarcasm, really, and it pretty much ties into conventional knowledge due to Google promoting their ability to crawl and render JavaScript. And it's not a bit of a old news, essentially, but we're still seeing a lot of clients, websites and prospects coming in and saying, oh, Google likes JavaScript. Why do we have to deal with it? So just a bit of a background. Even John Mueller, throughout the years, and with this example tweet, says that Google pretty much doesn't see fundamental difference between how it understands JavaScript. Now, as mentioned, about 25% of the time, we do see that it is creating an issue. So just wanted to give you probably one of the famous case studies of Hulu, which is Netflix of US, really. And they implemented a change back in 2016, which meant that they lost 50% of their visibility. And obviously, with those things, we want to avoid that at all costs. So without testing and understanding how JavaScript works, it's really, really hard. So essentially, the reason why this is happening is because Google doesn't really understand JavaScript at the first stage. So in here, you will see that there is a script, and it's pretty much very extreme example of this. But in here, we have a React single page application script, which essentially means that this is all Google will see. And in this particular case, about 8 months later, Google still sees and indexes 0 pages of that content. So essentially what that means for a business perspective, there's a massive issue from the investment point of view, because you might spend thousands on a new website, not hundreds of thousands. Essentially, if Google doesn't see that website, you will not get your return on investment of any sort. Now, as a case study where we've done, we worked on sites that were JavaScript based. I can give you an example of brand in automotive industry, where on average they were growing about 25% of the year on year. What that means really is that this company, despite JavaScript, still has been able to provide a lot of value and generate growth. However, when we removed the dependency on JavaScript in March 2018, we could see a drastic change in there, where we've been able to deliver 55% growth year on year. So obviously, imagine what would that do to your business, and essentially it makes a big difference to actually make sure that JavaScript is not a blocker in the way that Google sees your content. So why is this happening? Effectively, last year in May, Google has announced finally, after several years, that JavaScript rendering isn't really a primary element of their crawler and rendering. They just kind of bolted it on further down the line as JavaScript became more important. So in the first wave, when they visit your site, they will only understand HTML and CSS of your website. And then from our testing, we had a client actually where they've been publishing their blog content through JavaScript dynamic render servicing. And that really meant that for about 2-3 weeks after publishing, Google still were not able to see that content and index it. And it's a massive issue, because if you're also investing in your content marketing strategy and you're releasing 4, 5, 6 blog posts a week, this means that like Google is not even able to see this, and from our experience, also that content is not able to perform at the same level as it is when it's published through static content like HTML. So essentially what Google's official version is saying is that the rendering of JavaScript-powered websites in Google search is deferred until Googlebot has resources available to process that content. And this is where you might have seen a tweet from John Mueller saying that maybe Googlebot didn't feel like crawling and rendering JavaScript at the time. And this is really about the resource intensity of JavaScript and how big the JavaScript can get in terms of content delivery. So in terms of key considerations really and how to fix that issue, in some JavaScript frameworks, it's not really that difficult. You can enable a server-side rendering method, or if you are designing your technology from scratch, example, you could be migrating to a new platform, it's probably better to stick to server-side programming languages like PHP or .NET, etc. If you have to, or you're already in a React app, try not to deliver critical HTML tags using JavaScript. So by critical, I mean it might be your canonicals, it might be your meta robots commands, etc. And probably the last consideration, if you've got no other choice really, is don't send conflicting signals. So what I mean by that really is that if you're trying to remove your tags from content through JavaScript, let's say you have a no index tag and you want to try to make it index. That means really that Google will try to stick with the harshest alternative, so that might not work for you. So, and similarly through hreflang targeting, canonicals versus canonicalized, those things are quite critical from your content and how Google is understanding it. So try not to conflict it, please. Right, so I know I've been quite brief in terms of JavaScript. I refer to it within the international strategy as well, because we've seen cases where JavaScript also is affecting international targeting quite a bit. But let me just give you an overview of perfect international SEO strategy and what to consider. So as a case study, we've picked a brand in a B2B IT industry where essentially they've been growing year on year at about 19% without really a proper aligned strategy. However, since then, when we've focused both on technical and content localization, they've seen over 370% year-on-year growth, which shows that there's a massive opportunity internationally. And with the right strategy in place and the right setup from the beginning, it's going to make it easier for you to deliver on that as well. One of the things in terms of foundations, you need to pick your right markets through research, through making sure that you can do business in those countries. Obviously, the next steps are having content localized in as many languages and countries as you can and realistically do within your budgets. And also the technical setup, so it will be things like what domain do we pick, how do we geo-target the users in those countries, etc. And to really understand the KPIs you're driving through. Are you going to dominate those markets, or are you trying to establish a foothold? It's really important to understand what you're trying to achieve and how you're measuring that success then. So in terms of some tips and some common issues that we're finding, to maximize the opportunities, we often notice that at country level targeting for the websites that do not have enough content to support it. So for example, if you just have a content in French language and you're trying to just target France with that language, you're then removing the opportunity to rank very well in Canada or Belgium, etc. You will still rank, but Google will basically think that you're mostly focused on France as a country, so that will be their priority for your website. Essentially, if you don't have enough content and you don't have to target it by country, it might be a good idea to test just targeting the French as a language. And similarly for English, while you're trying to build footholds in all those countries like US, Canada, or Australia, it might be better to actually withhold the hreflang implementation and just focus on English to start with, and then build additional websites for each country individually. which tends to work really well, but it's about the process of how you're actually going to get there as well. So as a key takeaways, really, it's about matching targeting to where your business is. Aim to expand to every country with a localized website. And if it doesn't make sense to start with to target country, and get languages instead, and just then gradually move to countries as you get more content in there. In terms of domain strategy, obviously you have 3 different options, and as a guide, you can put your website on the global domain with subfolders. You could have subdomains, which tend to be best for entirely separate websites, to be fair, like let's say Blogspot is providing a space for people to host their blog, and each of the websites on that domain is not related to each other. That's where it probably, in our experience, works best. And you have local domains where you can granularly target each local market individually, which also has their cons. But to kind of cut to the chase and really from the SEO perspective and from scalability perspective, there is a big case for subfolders. To start with, I can show you some case studies where people switch to a subdomain and they've seen a decrease in traffic. Or one of the case studies for Salesforce, Ruth here mentioned that basically they doubled their traffic overnight. When they moved from subdomain to subdirectory. And this is really about how Google recognizes link equity and the relevance of those pages and grasps them together. And it really applies within the international strategy as well. So definitely subfolders are the best choice to start with. Local domains, the only thing I'm going to say is that from the geo-targeting point of view, they're amazing. However, you really need a lot of resources to bring link equity and relevance to them independently, and it's really big effort. So if you do have a budget for it, to treat them individually, go for it, but probably the most lean approach is subfolders in the end. So I did promise to show you how JavaScript is making it difficult for international targeting, and it's really about the scripts. In this case, we have been working with several clients actually, where they've introduced massive tracking script at the beginning of their HTML code, and what it really pointed to is a drop in hreflang detection, and that can really be very difficult for your users then to find the correct version of your site further down the line. So essentially, it's not great at all. And in here, we can see the drop off from like around 60,000 tags to only 10,000 tags, which is not ideal at all. So this is how powerful and damaging JavaScript can be. However, I don't want to slag off JavaScript too much. It is amazing piece of technology. The trend for it is growing. But what we really need to understand is that search engines are really trying to catch up with that technology just yet. We're only really talking about Google at this stage as being, firstly, their market share is dropping a lot, especially in the US, where they went from like around 30–40% to about 10%. And they are nowhere near the understanding of JavaScript rendering to what Google is, and even Google is struggling at this stage. They've made some adjustments, and they are speaking about having plans to integrate JavaScript rendering into the main cycle and be a lot better. However, how long is that going to take? And as the average website is taking about probably 5 to 10 years in the life cycle of the site, we really need to focus on the ability to deliver those results today, not tomorrow, not in 10 years time. So this is really something that we have to bear in mind when planning those things out. Right. So this is one of my favorite subjects, and I've mentioned a lot that it's important to test the hypotheses, and that conventional wisdom or even official statements from Google are not always as clear, or they apply in certain scenarios. And we really need to be sure that we're implementing the right solutions for the client's website. So testing is really definitely a big part of it. Now, obviously, a data-driven approach is fairly simple. We do some research, we do the testing, and we implement the changes. However, with SEO testing, it's always a bit of tricky, because you have to show the website not only to users but also to search engines. So we've spent some time and found that existed technology that basically is based around content delivery networks that is making it a lot easier. So what that means really is that CDNs will have a network of caching servers across the globe. They will also be sometimes called edge servers. Which then you can derive names like edge computing and serverless computing as well that are associated with that technology. So the main reason for them has occurred because they make the website faster when the users are getting the website served closest to their location. So they are acting a bit of a kind of like a storage space for your site that drives those web pages through location. Some of them do have additional security features like protection against DDoS attacks, and also recently they are leveraging browsers Workers API, which is really what this chat is about. So what is Workers API then? Workers API essentially lets your developers or external development team to make changes to your site. And essentially, it's a technology that you can insert some code between your server and the user's browser and make it changes. In terms of use cases, it's mainly around A/B testing for SEO, but also you can deploy changes to your content. You can personalize it. You can manage bot traffic. So essentially, if you wanted to remove some bots, like ad bots or some spammy bots that you don't want to access your site, you could do that through this technology as well. In some cases, we've also seen emergency SSL implementation as well, where you can basically migrate your site to secure protocol. But in here, effectively, I'm going to mainly discuss the Cloudflare Workers. It's a technology that has been discussed quite a bit in the industry, and we've used it also to do some good tests. And essentially, it's the future of how we see this technology progressing. In terms of Cloudflare Workers, obviously they have a massive network of servers. They have some performance benefits as well in terms of scaling and quick launch. You can write code in JavaScript or Rust to deliver tests. And also they associate key value storage, which is a small database that you can use for associations and making sure that that the tests are getting the right information to implement on pages. So just a bit of an example. On our own site, we've done some small tests to give you an idea of how this works. So essentially, as you can see, we can add more content. We can move sections around. So in here, one of the sections of the site, we move to the bottom of the page. We also can remove content and create essentially a new template. Now, in some content management systems, it's fairly easy and straightforward. In others, it costs thousands of pounds or more to develop new page templates, and you have to wait as well to actually get that delivered. Whereas with workers, you can spend fairly limited amount of time and get that done right away. In terms of further changes, you can also amend things like metadata and just replace basic things, but also work on some bigger projects like hreflang and structured data. You can test whether which format will work for you best. Also, what we're testing and researching internally at the minute is also more dramatic site structure changes with where URLs are changing, etc., and basically helping then make a better case for those recommendations. So some considerations here in terms of the way we think about A/B testing. Really, is about creating a sign of process, as it's important for all stakeholders within the campaign team and the business itself to understand what's changing, when it's going to change, how it's going to implement impact the website. So yeah, this is really important. Obviously, before launching it, it's also important to have quality assurance, and nobody wants to break the site, and really having a process for that as well is really crucial here. Version control is one of the things where as you're launching multiple tests, obviously we want to test one thing at the time, but it doesn't stop us from thinking and designing and testing internally within, let's say, limited IP address. New tests and new hypotheses. So then once the one test is finished, and either way it's successful or unsuccessful, we can be prepared to launch new ones. And also with that technology, we only have limited amount of time that we can basically amend the code, and it tends to be between 10 and 50 milliseconds of computing power. However, your mileage will vary on the types of subscription you will have as well. So in terms of benefits, I did refer to them a little bit, but just to be quite clear, you can focus on implementing changes that matter. You'll definitely get efficiency in terms of time and cost, because the budgets will be allocated in the right place to start with, but also in terms of making sure that only the right changes are implemented. Then we also drive results this way a lot easier, because we're not focusing on unimportant things. We just get the right solutions for you. Right. So essentially, that's very rough overview and top level overview of A/B testing. Now, the key here as well in terms of A/B testing is to have the right insights and making sure that you will get the information at the tips of your fingertips to be able to firstly design the tests, know what the technical issues are causing the challenges for and blockers for the performance of the site. So we found that automation is a key here. Especially for massive sites that have got 10, 20 or more millions of URLs. So just to give you an idea around our technical process, but also probably all other website cycles as well. So to start with, we work through initial audit, making sure that we can find all the biggest opportunities for the site. We also tend to do a lot of platform SEO requirements specifications. We support implementation and go through migration as well, post-migration, and then kind of we move on to ongoing support, where we keep on finding new issues. Now, there's a lot of steps going into each of the elements of that process, and it's really very tedious work, and detail matters a lot, really. So typically we use dozens of different tools like online crawlers, insights tools like log files, SEMrush, ScreamFrog, backlink data. There's a lot of components going into this, and essentially what happens is that we're finding that there's a better way of doing this. So we're implementing and taking into account other technology like using SQL for querying, using Python and Dataiku to platforms to make sure that we're managing the kind of the process of gathering analysis and pulling insights from data as efficiently as effectively as possible. And frequently we're finding that really the standard technology of today, like using Excel, is not really fit for purpose, I suppose, from to even open the files, let alone analyzing. So I'll give you some examples of that. One of the clients, some of the clients we're working with massive fashion retailers, very big education organizations, for example, with over 80 locations, and also with furniture retailer with 500,000 products and product variations. So these are the kind of scales that it's really tough, not only for us, but also for search engines to discover the site properly. And what do we find, kind of speaking with people from those organizations, is that often only 10% of pages are being crawled to start with. So that only gives you really a head and very surface level understanding of what Google and other search engines see. Obviously, there are other constraints like hardware. Working through a laptop that's not current, it's really impossible to do this. So we've invested a lot in technology in-house, but also, as mentioned, using platforms like BigQuery and Colab really makes it and takes it to the next level. So I feel like if you are facing those scale challenges, it would be really good for you guys to implement or start looking into technologies like this. So I did mention file size limits as well. Recently, I've pulled a redirect chain report that had something like 13 gigabytes, which actually is limited to probably around 2-3 gigabytes, really. What can I say? Just to give you some examples of how we're using the technology and some ideas, one of the projects we're working on is helping our clients to do URL mapping. And it's really at scale here, but it's not massive scale from the size of the website perspective. So that site has about 10,000 pages. However, it built up 150,000 URL variations with backlinks and traffic. So this is not something that we can easily go, oh, let's just forget about those variations and let's focus on the traffic driving pages. They all drive traffic and relevant revenue through them. So it's best to actually try to resolve them as easy as possible. The reason why they have so many variations is really because there are parameterized URLs built out of the faceted navigation and essentially also with varied order of the parameters. So it's quite tricky to manage this. On top of that, we have your site migration coming up. So we need an easy way to migrate that website. And really, in terms of manual mapping, we could do it, but it's really time consuming. So we'd probably have to spend good few months working through that information. So a better way of doing it actually is through use of Python, which is a scripting language that is commonly used by data scientists. And what we've really been able to achieve here is we've developed a script internally that will analyze URL structure and will also look into things like H1s and content on the web page that's currently there. And it will match it with automatically with probably around 85% accuracy to the new URL structure that we've designed internally with the client. And this is something really that takes away months of work and takes it to the next level really, because you can deliver the same amount of work in a week, let's say, over that long period of time. So the accuracy increases, that you're saving time, you're really able to say with big probability that this is going to be a success rather than whereas doing it manually, it leaves that space where you're not quite sure whether you caught every aspect of it. So definitely minimizes the risks are assigned to by nature with a site migration. Another example I can give you is site speed testing. And it's really one of those recommendations that technical SEOs will go through and will check and will just say, improve your site speed. It's too slow. And I know how frustrating it can be, because to actually improve site speed meaningfully for a website that already is launched and has been in launch for a couple of years, it's not really that easy. At least for not a lot of our clients, we found that working on that, firstly, it might not be the priority. Secondly, we don't understand necessarily what that priority is. So what really needs to happen here is we need a bit of a competitor benchmarking, checking how we're doing query specific. So because that's one of the things where site speed in terms of pure search engine optimization will be one of those ranking factors that will be a tiebreaker. So if all things are equal, and your site is a lot slower or is in like bottom 20% of all web pages that are trying to rank, you're not going to win this. So we need to know what do you really need to do to actually make it worthwhile and invested the right amount of effort into that. So in this case, Python is again our savior here because it can help us understand if it is a tiebreaker in our case or not. We can get first 100 results for a set of keywords, understand each of the competitive spaces for each of the search engine page results, and perform basic statistical analysis to understand, are we in that bottom 20% or are we in the middle or are we at the top of that funnel, and really understand whether that recommendation is a priority to start with across all other technical SEO recommendations, or is this something that we can park and address, or maybe just treat it as a year-long project where you delegate a certain amount of your budget to site speed rather than just treat it in a one big go. So this is another example where testing and understanding really and getting into the data side of things really helps to put that priority in the dev queue really. Another example here I can give, I mentioned annoying 13 gigabyte file. So essentially what we can do, well, what the challenges here are is time and cost, and also hardware and software constraints, because it's essentially once you get past a couple of gigabytes in terms of your files, those traditional basic home office tools have not been designed to do that, and you really need a database to do that. So with BigQuery, in this case, we can so much easily, more easily than traditional ways. Get the file, upload it there, and then perform some SQL queries to basically get the same information. You can format it, you can then do whatever you want with it, but it just it's not comparable essentially, because it's just like using a hammer versus using a very sophisticated tool um, on the project. And that really is another aspect of how you can maximize that automation and making sure that you have what is required to get that insight out of your data. So thank you very much for listening in. I hope that answered some of your questions on where to even start, what ideas to have around those few themes that we've worked through. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Right. So I have a couple of questions here around Cloudflare. So let me just read them out to you. You talked about Cloudflare to do A/B testing. What I need to invest in this system to be able to do this, or can you do it with other CDNs or content management system? Yeah, so really good question. Essentially, you don't really need Cloudflare as a mandatory component of this. We've looked at Amazon Lambda at Edge as well, and there are other providers where if you're already using them, some call that functionality functions. And if you're already using them, there's a fair chance that it's either going to be supported or now or in the future. So you might want to speak with your provider to see what the best solution is. But yeah, definitely check it out. As a technology, it's awesome. I hope I've managed to convince you at least to have a look at it. As we're quite excited about that. In terms of another question I have here is, should I remove all JavaScript from my website, or are there any workarounds to make it readable? So yeah, as mentioned, we don't really want to crucify JavaScript as a technology here, as it's amazing. And there's also a big point around how the modern web development team is changing. So traditionally, you'd have your front-end web development team and back-end web development team, whereas with JavaScript technology like React or anything else, really, you can try to merge those into a single team. To both save cost and also make sure that that the team is smaller, so it's easier to manage projects, etc. And you can get generally more done with JavaScript as it's more linear. Now, the challenge from the other hand is that not all JavaScript is bad, but there are certain elements that have been used over the years within that probably 3-4 year cycle, and even recently, is that those content changes are created dynamically. So what that means is that you're getting an AJAX request from a database, and you serve that content on a web page. Because JavaScript rendering is not happening right at the start of Google's crawling, but it's further down the line. That's what is driving really that issue. Also, another aspect that you need to be aware of is that JavaScript is a bit more prone to errors as well. What doesn't tend to impact the browser, but it does impact how Google is seeing JavaScript. So to answer your question in kind of one line, you don't have to remove all JavaScript, but you need to be very careful on how you drive the content side of the website to the web pages and to the browser, because that's really what Google cares about, and that's where we see the biggest issues. If you implement things like pre-rendering, even hybrid rendering, which is serving that content statically to search engines, you have a better chance to rank and outperform. Now you need to be careful around site speed as well, because we've seen cases where people would enable pre-rendering engine, and I don't know whether that engine was built in-house or was a third-party engine. Now we've seen a drastic increases in page speed to like 20 seconds, which is obviously not where we want to get. So just as a note, anything above 5 seconds, Google will ignore and time out. So you've got about 4 or 5 seconds for Google to read your content actually. So yeah, do the pre-rendering, test it out, see how it works, make sure it's quick, and also you could potentially look at technologies like Next.js or Gatsby, depending on the type of your site, to create static pages from a content management system into pure HTML. This is something really cool. We've been looking at our clients and their dev teams, and it really works a charm. Now, the final question I have is, I'm currently using a subdomain structure for my international sites. Will moving to a subfolder system improve my performance? And the answer is, it depends. And I hate giving it like that, but let me dive deeper so you can see what I mean. In terms of moving and site migrations, they present quite a big risk, so it needs to be managed properly. So providing it's managed properly and you again test it out and don't launch all of the countries in and move all of your countries from subdomain to subfolder. Do it one by one. If you have 20, launch them one by one, prepare solely, treat each of the cases individually. And what you will likely see is a massive growth. Now, as I said, there are a lot of ifs and buts here, and you need to manage it properly, but that's the general industry insight that we can see from our own tests and also across the board. Right, I have one more. The question says, what exactly is the SEO influence of the A/B testing you showed us? What exactly is the SEO influence of the A/B testing you showed us? Right. So essentially, in terms of the influence from A/B testing, you really need to. In terms of A/B testing, it's more of a mindset that typically what is happening here is when technical SEO is involved, we'd do an SEO audit, let's say, that contains 50, 70 different areas that we're looking at, anything from structured data to page title optimization to JavaScript issues to site speed improvement, a lot of the things. I think you get the idea. So let's say I would create a recommendation that you need to rewrite all of your page titles. And essentially, as a best practice approach, this isn't really a best practice approach, but it might cost you £30,000 to do that. Now, is it worth you investing £30,000 on a best practice approach, or should we change that and go, actually, we could do with testing 100 page titles that to test the hypothesis that including certain keywords or changing the pattern of it actually makes a difference. And the how of it is kind of coming into the perspective of there is certain technology that can automate it, and then there is an option to do it manually, so manually changing all of those things. Now, I'd do it automatically as much as possible, to be fair, because again, it's time and effort that we don't want to waste, really. in terms of the A/B testing that I showed, and that philosophy of actually checking out the best practice for JavaScript, really, as an industry, there's a lot of people out there that are questioning, and we are one of them, on how Google was treating JavaScript over the years. Now, that philosophy of questioning and being inquisitive about what we get as facts and then checking those out is kind of that philosophy. So where we've implemented and removed JavaScript for one of our clients, again, we went from 25% year-on-year average growth to 55% year-on-year yearly growth. So I suppose if we wanted to treat it to the next level and go, okay, we understand that JavaScript is not good for the website. Essentially, you can have micro tests. You could, if you have multi-location setup, like one of the education organizations I've mentioned, if they had a JavaScript issue, they could just do it for one of the subfolders, see how that performs, and etc. So hope that answers your question more or less. Let me just see if there are any more questions. No, I think that's it. So thank you very much for your time. If you do wish to ask us our questions post-webinar, feel free to Twitter me, or also please take a note of our company contact details. Give us a call or email us. We're always happy to help and discuss either opportunities or your challenges to basically get the right advice for you. Thanks very much and enjoy your day.